Hello and welcome to an exciting new edition of Meet the Solutionaries on greentv.com. This is going to be a particularly interesting session because not only is it the first time I've had the pleasure of having so many people to interview and have a discussion with at once, but these are a group of 6 hunger strikers who have been going without food, and perhaps, I hope you've had water, but it's a fast, and that's been going on for a week now, is my understanding, and it's for a very worthy cause, something that you're going to tell us why this issue is so important to you that you gave up food. And you're not young people, you're not old, but you're not young, for what I believe is 6 or 7 days now. This has been a roving hunger strike, as I understand it, in Massachusetts. You're all part of the 350.org group in Massachusetts. I know the group well and have been honored to have Bill McKibben on my radio shows and now Green TV a couple of times. So thanks for joining the movement to save our planet. And this is all about plant that MWAC is planning and already start to build in Peabody. And that is an area that you say is not exactly industrial, and it's an oil and gas plant that should not be even being conceived, let alone built, as the planet is on fire. And as we're being told by the top scientists in the world that we need to get off yesterday, and to be building something that's going to be spewing greenhouse gas emissions for 10, 20, 30 years or more seems kind of crazy at this point. So while people may think you're crazy to be on a fast, I have nothing but respect for you, and I would predict that our viewers would feel the same. So I don't want to take up any more time because your time is precious. You're having a big rally today, and I want you to preserve your strength, but I also want to hear from each of you if we can start.
Yeah, so my name is Nathan Phillips, and I decided to take this drastic action for my children and my students at Boston University, where I teach as an ecologist. And this Peabody peaker plant that we're striking to close down is a climate and energy emergency. And even if a lot of people maybe hadn't heard about it before, the climate emergency plays out in 1,000 or 10,000 different places across the globe. And we really have to, say enough is enough. We cannot be building new fossil fuel infrastructure in 2022. So that's why I'm doing it.
A peak plant, and that's kind of ironic, isn't it? Because energy is going to be needed as it gets too hot, it gets too cold. Roger. Thank you, Nathan.
I'm Sue Donaldson. I echo what Nathan said, and our hope is partly to stop and bring attention to and stop construction of the Peabody peaker, and partly just to bring attention to the incredible urgency of the climate crisis, which I think many people still don't quite recognize. I retired almost 10 years ago to do this climate work full time. I think most of us here do this pretty much full time. And we have tried all the usual routes. We have lobbied, we have rallied, we have marched, we have protested. Most of us have gotten arrested a couple of times. And it just does not seem to make a dent in business as usual. And so we are hoping that this will get some attention. If not from the government, at least from more of the people. Mm-hmm. And people think of climate change as, storms, flooding, days that are really hot. People don't necessarily think about food shortages and mass starvation and migration from places that have become unlivable and the resulting wars. And this is what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. So, not eating for a while, excuse the expression, feels like peanuts compared to that.
I bet peanuts sound good right now. And have you actually gone without food and drink other than water? I certainly hope you've had water.
We've been drinking water, yeah, water and tea.
And how are you feeling? I mean, you look pretty good. Your color is good, and I'm sure your fortitude is strong. So go ahead.
Rob Bonney. I live about 3 miles from the proposed site, and so I have a personal concern, but I am also doing a hunger strike because many people I know are supportive of my work as an advocate for a sustainable, livable world, but they're kind of tuned out and I'm trying to get their attention. If I'm willing to do this, maybe they'll be willing to spend a bit of their time every week or every day to join our team. We're talking about a positive outcome. That's another message that we're trying to share. We are looking for a healthier place to live, and one that is quite beautiful in a lot of ways. And so I think that's important to stress. I think the others will fill in the rest of the reasons why we're doing this.
My name is Judith Black. I live in Marblehead, Massachusetts. I am a professional storyteller and educator. And when word of this plant came, and I found out that my town, which is just 2 away from Peabody, had bought into it, I said, wait a minute. Why didn't we know that? Why weren't we engaged in this process? If you're going to put an energy facility in the middle of a community that could cause it harm, and we're buying into that, what does that say about us? Why was there no vetting? So, I mean, there are just so many issues here that galvanized us. There is the big issue. Our planet is on fire. There is the community issue. How can we get energy at the cost of the local people's health? There are the local issues. How can you put in new fossil fuel infrastructure that is damaging in every way? We know that gas leaks when you pull it out of the ground with the fracking. It leaks through the whole piping system. And this is a bloody oil and gas facility. So they won't even be able to use the gas in the winter because it doesn't run well. It'll be an oil burning facility, and our planet's on fire. It is insane. No one in any of the 14 towns that bought into this plan were consulted about it. And that's one of the reasons we went to every single town to say, hi, wake up. Do you know what your town's just done? And try to present these issues. And it feels like going against Goliath because business as usual seems to own the world. So as Greta says, our politicians have not worked for us. Our industry has not worked for us. It is up to us. And as Sue just said, we've tried everything. And as us, this is the next step.
I'm Joy Gurrie. I live in Ipswich. And I just keep thinking, you know, we have this big, extraordinarily beautiful planet that we're destroying. And with it, our lives are at stake. I have a 13-year-old granddaughter who loves dolphins and skiing. And I want her future to include a healthy ocean and snow-covered mountains. That's my statement. And thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
As Judith implied, the approval of the Peabody peaker plant was completely undemocratic, and it's really a disaster in the making. It's been made completely clear by perhaps the most influential group of scientists who speak to the climate crisis, which is the international, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. And these are scientists from over 100 countries who are a very conservative group of scientists. They don't draw any conclusions unless they're completely vetted and supported by, scientific data, who say we cannot afford to build any more fossil fuel infrastructure, whether it's a pipeline or a power plant fueled by gas or oil or coal. So this is just another example of us doing things that we cannot afford to do. And why is it happening? Not because people were consulted and got to have a considered conversation about whether it was the best thing to do. It was decided, it was approved. The approval was allowed by Governor Baker and by Secretary of Energy Thea Harides, and without consultation of the people involved. And it runs directly counter to the climate roadmap bill, which the governor signed last year, which says we have to meet certain benchmarks over the next 10 years and the next 20 years. Well, this peaker plant is going to prevent us from meeting those benchmarks. It's just another one of the things that will prevent that from happening. And as the UN Secretary General said in the last, in talking about the last IPCC report, which came out at the end of February, and which was a forecast of total disaster unless we do the things that we need and can do. And it said, there's still hope. We can still change the path we're on. It's not too late, but we have to start doing those things. He said, the state of the world right now and the direction we're going is a criminal failure of leadership. Those are the words he used. And that criminal failure includes our governor and our secretary of energy. But because by approving a peaker plant like this, these are the small decisions that get made on a local basis that add up to the climate emergency.
Delay
And so I'm doing this as a way to just try to draw attention to that peaker plant in particular, to the necessity of changing the direction we're going in general. And that this is, I think for all of us, doing the hunger strike is a kind of symbol for not doing business as usual, stepping outside of our comfort zone and really trying to change the way we're operating.
Do you get the impression that Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, is finding it harder and harder to find words that are alarming enough? Delay is death was one of the quotes from the most recent one, Code Red for Humanity, from the August report. And yet, does it seem like people are listening? And what kind of reaction have you received when you have informed your local community about what's happening? Was there surprise? Was there outrage? Was there indifference?
There has been a variety. The people who have come to our standouts have been extremely supportive because they are part of the climate crowd. People in cars, some of them have honked and waved and given us support, and others have given us other kinds of gestures and comments, which I don't believe I can repeat on air.
Because they have reservations on another planet, right?
Yes.
So a mix, right? The planet crowd, I've never heard that expression, but I'm part of it. One who thinks that this precious planet is worth saving. And really, if you ask people separate from their ideology and our ridiculous, dangerous political divisiveness, I bet everybody does think this is a pretty good place to live. What's the alternative, right? There's no planet B. And yet it seems that there has been and continues to be, considering the threat, the scope of it, and the enormity of the permanence of it, kind of mass indifference, or we kind of went from what problem, this is like the public in America and maybe around the world, to, oh yeah, it's too late. Of course, we're screwed. And doesn't that drive you crazy, as it does me? What about that place in between? And what about our kids and grandkids? And if there was a memo that said we're giving up on future generations, I missed it. I wonder how much time it took to plan this. And did it start with one or two of you and it grew to 6 of you? Did you have 20 and some dropped out when they thought about the reality of those hunger pings? Yes.
I'd like to respond to something you just said, which is, how do people react to this? Well, often I'm a Rotarian. So when I present at my Rotary Club, there's always, someone who goes, well, how am I going to run my chainsaw? And
I live in Texas now, so I know that guy. I know that guy. Yeah.
And it is up to us to constantly own the narrative and enlarge the frame and say, I don't know how you're going to run your chainsaw, but would you like your children to be able to breathe and drink clean water and eat? We have to constantly enlarge this frame, this narrative, so that people don't focus on my comforts. Yeah, you might have to give something up, horrors. But what's important, and keep saying, what is the big picture? What is the big important picture? I think Nathan wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah, just that it's tough to break through, because this story of the Peabody peaker, as Judith said, it's called Project 2015A. When people hear that, it makes no sense. And then this is an acronym-laden process with acronyms like MWEC and ISO and FERC. And I can see your eyes are already glazing over, but it's hard to break through.
2015A may stand for asinine. That's what I'm thinking, but
Yeah, so people don't know, and we have to break through with stories to tell this story, and we're doing a story in our lives right now to break through. And we visited the grid operator last Friday, the independent system operator, ISO, and the external affairs director came out to meet us. And that person didn't even know about how the Peabody peaker plant is actually connected in an anti-democratic way to anti-democratic decisions that have been made all the way at the level of the New England grid and up to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. So the Peabody peaker plant is like a line in the sand. It's a point that connects to much larger scales.
do you have any support at your state legislator level?
Oh, yeah.
And did they come out to support you? Have there been letters of, to the editor in your local newspapers? I read a couple of articles, because you're trying to obviously bring attention to the people who are in a position to, well, people in power, even though this is an issue of power, a different kind of power, and they're not always as enlightened as we'd like them to be. I suppose you would agree that we should have some rule where you cannot run for office, any office, local, state, regional, or national, unless you believe in science. Maybe take a science quiz. Yes.
Yeah, so right now the power, a lot of it is with the governor and his secretary. And so we are asking your listeners, Massachusetts, if they're in Massachusetts, to call Governor Baker and urge him to initiate a review of the environmental impacts and the community impacts that are required and were not done. And so that is an action people can do to help us. I do want to add another thing, just to put this in context. This is a fossil fuel burning plant in a highly densely populated area with a hospital, a quarter mile away. And it is going to create greenhouse gas and toxins, particulate pollution for 30 years. This is, and we have just passed a law saying we're going to be at net zero emissions by 2050 and cut them in half by 2030. So, okay, I understand this was, planned 7 years ago, and we know even more, although we knew enough 7 years ago to not do this, but we need to change the plan. We need leadership from the governor to say, okay, we can do this. And there are affordable options. There was a proposal around the same time as this, or maybe a bit later, but that would have replaced this with battery storage. That was, in my opinion, even more useful than a temporarily fired up gas plant. That is, and this is, and maybe one of the others can explain the technicalities, because we had to do a lot of investigation. I mean, Nathan found a screenshot on a tweet that showed a piece of information that people didn't know about. And I believe you can confirm, Nathan, that this was referring to the fact that this battery plant storage was deep sixed because it was too cheap and fossil fuels could not compete with it. So
Have evidence that someone actually said that?
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so 4 days before this entity that wants to build the Peabody peaker plant told in the only public meeting that they ever had 6 years into the proposal process, told the public that batteries were not a good replacement for the Peabody peaker plant for this reason and that. 4 days before that, that same entity had bid for a battery storage project into the same grid market that they bid the Peabody peaker plant. So they weren't forthcoming, and they were making arguments for battery storage while to the public, they were making arguments against battery storage. So in fact, this entity, MWEC, the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, they actually wanted to do the right thing in potentially replacing this dirty peaker with clean battery. And that's where the New England grid operator, ISO, actually canceled that project for being too affordable and out competing the fossil peaker. So that's how broken our system is, all the way up and above the municipalities, the entire grid operator.
That's a stop the presses headline. My goodness, some investigative reporter should really get to the bottom of that. And, what happened when that was made public? Are you the ones who you revealed that, Nathan? Was that your find?
Yes, it came out in a FERC, a very mundane looking Federal Energy Regulatory Commission document. And I happened to scan it on a tweet, as Rob said. And it's like, I saw these letters, MWEC. Well, MWEC is this entity that wants to build this peaker plant. And this was a sweeping New England FERC docket. So it turns out that the peaker plant is connected to the same entity and battery projects that connect all the way up to the national level in FERC. And we didn't know this until recently.
This is wacky, and I think we're FERC'd. What do you think? All right, I have to sometimes amuse myself because this is so heavy and unbelievable. It is almost, it would be, well, don't look up, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth saying, there have been a number of projects around the Boston area where there was a gas pipeline in West Roxbury and there was a compressor station in Weymouth, both of which were strongly resisted by the local communities, not only the people, but the local elected officials and state representatives, and in some cases, federal elected officials. And it just feels as though there is this juggernaut, which is really driven by the fossil fuel industry, by the corporations, and that the governmental permitting processes and so forth have all somehow been hijacked in a way that allows these things to go through, even when really nobody else wants them.
And hijacked, what about the American public? Have we been brainwashed to think that everything's fine with these American Petroleum Institute television commercials? Our clean energy future, Chevron's got one now. It's human to look for the best kind of energy. It's almost like someone said, we've got to work human into that ad somewhere. So let's come up with a sentence that actually makes no sense.
I'll send you a little video we made on greenwashing, which has become an art in this era.
And speaking of greenwashing, I'm a little frustrated with my own industry, broadcast news, because the news networks especially now think they are covering climate change with an occasional story, usually in conjunction with Earth Day or an IPCC report, then back to our regular scheduled programming, when having covered the green movement from every angle for the better part of the last 2 decades, I know how much they're missing. But that's the problem. If the public, I've heard people say to me, Betsy, if it was really such an urgent, massive, important issue, why aren't they covering it on CNN every day? It should be, headline news. I said, good question. And I suspect it is because, in part, they're fossil fuel advertisers continuing, and they're afraid it's going to tune out, viewers. And not necessarily. I think there's nothing more dramatic and compelling than is humanity going to get out of its own way and save itself? And are we going to stop the insanity and Sean Hannity or not? And yet I do think that's a big part of the problem. What do you think?
So Nathan and I worked on a story to try and help people understand this strange sequence of permitting. But the main character, it's King FERC and Queen Gascolia. And it's a takeoff on Snow White, but it's clearly the Queen who calls all the shots. And that's pretty much what we're learning. We're still completely under the thrall of these energy companies who are fighting for their lives, not ours.
And especially, I think of The Emperor Has No Clothes. Like, what's wrong with the picture when most people seem to be walking around in a parallel universe like everything's fine? And the morning TV shows, which I watch, the Today Show, like everything is cheerful and things are bright and it's spring. And it's like, are they crazy or am I crazy? Do you have that experience ever?
Yeah, I think in a lot of these cases that the so-called decision makers will say, that's unfortunate, but there's nothing we can do. And when I hear anyone say there's nothing we can do about a project like this, what I hear is we don't really care. And we care about the community in Peabody and our climate, a livable climate. And everyone can speak out, whether you're a resident or an elected official. You can have the courage to say the Peabody peaker plant is a bad idea and should be halted.
And of course, it's not the only one, right? There must be others around the country that are in some phase of planning or building. And I'm sure they would say, well, we have peak demand. We've got, more people, it's hotter and more people want air conditioning and it's too cold. We lived through the Snowmageddon crisis in Austin last year. There was no heat, we were without power for days and days, people died. So they're saying we have to provide extra energy, that there's public demand for it. Talk about a vicious cycle.
I live in Western Massachusetts, and one of our local utilities is building a new gas pipeline right in the middle of a city. And they're saying, oh, we need this and so on and so on. Well, somebody leaked that company's presentation at an industry forum. And basically what they said is, we are fighting electrification tooth and nail, and we plan to scare the public with the prospect of outages if we are not able to build this.
A gas line leaked, huh? A gas line leak. So speaking of news, this moment, what's going on in Ukraine is, I don't know, I hope you didn't watch the news on a regular basis, because I've been eating and I feel like fainting or throwing up when I turn on the news. It's unbelievable that in 2022, our energy situation and also geopolitical. And of course there is an oil connection, as there almost always is. Has there ever been a more stark reminder that the world needs to transition to renewable energy, do everything in our power, all hands on deck, more than what's unfolding today as we speak?
Indeed.
Is the ultimate. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I thought you were on mute. Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying the war in Ukraine is the ultimate example of this failure of leadership, that if we had been transitioning to solar and wind and hydropower over the last decades, Putin would not have the gas and money oil to finance this war, and it would not be happening.
And he's literally getting away with murder because there are countries that are afraid to ostracize because of their addiction to oil. I'm not one who just blames the fossil fuel industry because we're all using it, right? It's the whole system, right? It's the way, and we have benefited so much, modern society, developed countries, from fossil fuels, and yet we haven't known for some time that we've got to make this U-turn, and that's what's been too slow. How concerned are you about developing countries that are looking to, have more of what we've been fortunate to have? These are just some of the conundrums, right, that make it so difficult.
Can I just make one comment, Betsy? I have a different perspective on
Please.
the responsibility for the crisis we're in, that it really isn't about individuals or even, societies using the wrong kinds of vehicles or generating electricity in the wrong kinds of ways using fossil fuels, because the fossil fuel industry, which is probably the richest and most powerful industry in the history of the world, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decades to obfuscate and lie about the climate crisis. As you probably know, Exxon and Chevron, among other big oil companies, knew about this in the 1970s because their scientists were doing their own research about climate change. And they said to the fossil fuel CEOs, we're going to have a climate crisis in 30 years if we keep doing what we're doing. And here are the numbers. They knew it before Bill McKibben published The End of Nature. So, and as Bill says,
That was 1989, that book came out, I recall.
right. And as Bill says, over the past 30 years, there's been this controversy over whether the climate crisis was real. Everybody admits it's real now, but 5 years ago, that was not the case. That controversy was one side arguing that it's real, and the other side, namely the fossil fuel industry and its allies, arguing that it was not real when they knew it was real. So both sides knew the truth, and one side was lying. That's why we're where we are today. It's not because any of us have decided to use a gas-powered car rather than an electric car. We could all be driving electric cars by now.
And it's also right-wing media outlets like Fox, which continue to downplay, diminish furthering delaying action on climate change. And somehow they had to do a bit of a, mid-course correction when they were lying about COVID threats, but they haven't yet really been attacked for the 20 years that they've been saying it's, I've been on Hannity's show a dozen or so times, and, I'm a tree hugger, I'm a radical. I think it's pretty radical to be lying about the future of our planet and what about their kids and grandkids. So that in the vacuum that mainstream news media has left by not covering it sufficiently, the right-wing media, night and day, radio and television, and is still the most watched news network in America, is getting away with not only, I'd say murder, because people are dying because they're not aware that extreme weather is not their mother's tornado anymore, but also theft of our children's future.
Right. We have to reassign the term eco-terrorist to companies like Enbridge.
And maybe start naming storms, hurricanes, floods after some of the Republicans who won't vote for Build Back Better.
Hurricane X.
Let's start with Joe Manchin.
I really like that idea, Betsy. I think
Joe.
we should rename storms and start putting them out as Hurricane Exxon.
Yeah.
To your point about how people can seem to be living life as if nothing has changed or as nothing is changing, is that there is probably billions, if not trillions of dollars being spent to encourage us to buy stuff and be content and to, not cause trouble. And that's a major force that we are also.
It's been successful, hasn't it?
Yeah.
At everyone's expense, especially in the future. And the future, is here now. I mean, my daughter's 27, getting married in October, hopes to start a family. I have such mixed feelings about becoming a grandmother when I always thought it would be the happiest thing, besides having my daughter 27 years ago, that could possibly happen. And, yeah, I mean, you all look like you're probably of grandparent age, or some of you. How do you talk to them about, well, you have something to say you've done, right? Too many people don't. When you knew what you knew, you did everything you could. So you're doing it right now. You're walking the talk, you're fasting the talk. Yes, Judith.
So I have a TED talk called, I even forget what it is because your synapses start to widen when you're not eating. I have this TED talk somewhere, but
We'll find you.
It's about storytelling and climate. And there's this one scene where I'm in my kitchen with my very new daughter-in-law. And of course, just like you, Betsy, I'm like, do you understand? And she looks at me and she said, are you saying that we shouldn't have children? And it is such a freaking kick in the stomach, because how do you say to people, don't have hope? Don't have beauty, don't have joy in your life because we know the future is going to be horrible. How do you do that?
Especially when having a child, for anyone who has been lucky enough, is the most meaningful, rewarding thing I've ever done. I'm sure you all agree. And yet that's the one thing that is fraught now with, if not concern, maybe even terror for those of us who know too much. And isn't it crazy making when you're trying to tell your colleagues, people our age who do have children and maybe grandchildren are on the way, to wake up and smell the carbon. We need to get off our gases, folks, and they kind of look at you like it's my little pet passion, I should get over it. I should get a life. I should be happy. It's crazy making, isn't it? Well, thank you so much for what you're doing. Any closing thoughts about where you go from here after I hope you will end your fast sometime soon, because we need you to be around and to use your voices and put your money where your mouths are, literally.
We have had a tremendous response to this. And one of the things we asked was that our friends or new friends, anyone that's following us on Facebook or Twitter, do a solidarity strike of some sort, a fast in solidarity for a part of a day or a whole day, either from food or from fossil fuels, and to send us a message saying that they're supporting us. We even created a hashtag, pound fasting for a future, which is actually trending on Twitter. And I have been moved to tears by the responses. People have sent pictures with their pets, with their children's. I'm fasting with you. I didn't eat for 6 hours. I didn't eat today. I didn't drive today. I turned down the thermostat. This has been a tremendous community building experience. And I think we have grown our network. And after we have a nice meal together, we will talk about the next steps with this bigger team.
When you say last meal, I think of the final scene and Don't Look Up. Sorry.
I know.
We feel it too.
Last meal.
I hope that's not what happens.
Your first meal, I guess, is what it. Yeah, and Build Back Better is hanging in the balance in the meantime.
Yeah.
Should people write to Joe Manchin or protest at his house and his ilk?
We hope.
I mean, it is literally up for grabs, right? Our future. And
His house is a boat river, right? I'm not sure what's the most effective way with the national politics. I do think reaching out, if we show that America's behind this bill, that would really help. These people want to be reelected. That's what drives them. So if you can say that we will reward you for this leadership.
Well, one of the Bidens, I can't say which one, is a fan of this online platform. So what would you say to anyone in the Biden family? And President Biden gets it, but he's been obstructed at every turn, as was President Obama, by Republicans who don't get it or don't want to get it or pretend they don't get it, which is unacceptable in middle of, well, it's 2022. It's later than we think.
I guess the thought I would want to leave people with, Betsy, is that the politicians and the government leaders are not leading on this issue. That's been proven. I mean, we don't have to wait for any more UN-sponsored climate talks to find that out. That change on this issue is going to come where transformational change has always come from, which is grassroots organizing and people power. That's where the civil rights movement came from. That's where the anti-war movement came from that stopped the war in Vietnam. That's where the women's movement came from, and every important movement that I know about. So the challenge for us is organizing. It's getting people together to take collective actions. And the individual actions we take as families to put solar panels on our roofs, to insulate our houses, to drive electric vehicles are great and important, but they're insufficient. They won't make a dent at this late date. We need to be organizing people to take collective action. And that's the only thing that's going to move the needle. And talking to President Biden isn't going to move the needle. Talking to Joe Manchin is not going to move the needle, because those people would have done the leadership that is needed long before today if they were going to do it. There's too many pressures on them that are constraining their actions. We have to put more pressure on them than they're getting from the fossil fuel industry. And I think that's the challenge for us. That's why for us, this is an element in organizing collective action. We hope this will inspire people, to get together and do things as, in organizations and groups.
So we can demand systemic change.
Absolutely.
Any other final closing thoughts before we let you go back to your activism and then soon, hopefully, some nourishment?
These were both good ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time and what you're doing. And we hope to get this interview out as far and wide as we can so that others can be inspired by your actions. And my goodness, if you can go without food for a week, I'm just maybe going to stick to my coffee today. It's not water, but it's not food. Yeah. Who couldn't stand to lose a few pounds, which I imagine.
Yeah. All right. Take a picture of yourself and tweet it to pound fasting for the future.
I will do that. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you. And I hope the message gets out there continuing after what you've done. This is something you can hopefully exploit for the best possible purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy. Bye.